Are you growing as fast as you can? I mean, does it seem like others are growing faster than you? Well, I'm going to share a story with you today about a gentleman who started off from the construction trades, and I guess he would probably be voted not always super likely to succeed in this business. I mean, you think of a tradesman as somebody who, or tradeswoman, or somebody who's out doing something with their hands every single day. And I don't know, most people wouldn't have expected this guy to start being so successful in such a short period of time. And it's a few years. It's not, overnight success. He's one of these 3-4 years overnight successes that everyone's like, where'd this guy come from? So Don Barnes here, Red Barnes Audio. And today in Audio Barnyard, we're gonna make sure we help you fertilize your VO crops, keep that manure out of the house, and be sure all your rows stay straight in the field. A little GPS never hurts in that. So let me talk about this gentleman. I'm inspired by this one. So I ended up having a conversation with him today, and I just threw out my outline for the other podcast that I had scheduled to record today, because this just inspired me. And so I want to talk about it, maybe shorter, maybe longer, I don't know. But some very cool things. So we're going to talk about this gentleman, and I'm just going to call him SC for right now. I'll give you his name by the end here, because you'll want to watch this guy. It's really super cool. Now, when he started, he got a hold of me one time. Hey, I need some help with Studio One, and so we did some sessions, and I learned a little bit about him. Found out he was in the construction business. He was a drywaller, and he would end up going out, and you'd go into a big house, and people had put up the drywall, but he would tape it, and he would go ahead and do all the finish work. And relatively young guy, much younger than me anyway. So that everyone's younger than me, and we were talking about it, and one of the things that came up was he had some new tools that some of the older guys, like, well, I've been drywalling for the last 35 years. Drywall's been around a while. And they were using the older tools. He would watch what they do, and sometimes there were new tools that had come on the market, and those older gentlemen would kind of go, oh, no, I'm gonna do it this way, or I'm gonna do it that way, because I've been doing it this way for 35 years. And they were acting like, well, so that had to be the way. And then he'd get this one tool that would allow him to really get a great job, but with about a third the work that they were doing. And it was fascinating to have that discussion with him, because it's the same thing that happens in voiceover. And because of him watching people who have been doing something for 10, 20, 30 years, and some of them literally getting stuck in the mud, where drywall mud, for those of you that aren't in the construction business like I'm not, but those people would get stuck in I have a tool, and I know how to use it really, really well, and I do get great results with it, so I'm going to keep doing that, and I'm not going to look at any new tools. Well, this gentleman, SC, he actually, when he decided that he was going to get into the voiceover business, made a couple decisions from watching these other people. Number one, he was going to do his homework and find one of the better tools in the business, a set of them. And then he was going to learn from people that already were experienced. So he called me up. We did, I don't know, a half dozen private sessions going over all the fundamentals. He wanted to know his tools well. So that's one of the principles that has come back and has served him really well. This guy is booked out. It's November right now, and he's booked out to next July or August with major publishers, not just ACX royalty share type stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that, but he has major publishers that are asking him to do books, and there's a reason that he's been able to do this in a few years. So he started working with me, and what he was doing was seeking out some good information about how the tools work, because he had watched all these construction people, especially the older guys, who were pretty much doing what they had been doing, and they really weren't refining it. So he had developed, boy, if I get better tools, I can actually outwork or work less than these guys overall in terms of time, but get more done and get a higher quality finish on my work. So he's seeking out good people. Well, he's working with me for maybe 2 months, and then I find out he's also hired another coach in another area in the business area, and he's studying what happens on the business side. So he's got me working the tech side. He has somebody he's talking to about the business side. And then I think even before he called me, he already was doing performance coaching. So he had 3 coaches running at once. Sometimes we were overlapping. And of course, as what always happens is, that means occasionally he received conflicting information. And as a coach, you have this funny little thing in the background where you know what you're talking about, if you've done this a while, is solid. But that doesn't mean some other coach at the same level might approach it totally different. And I'll talk about this later in another thing where Gene Stewart, my original instructor, encouraged me to have multiple mentors, not just him as my only point of reference toward excellence, but to have a group of it. And he had a little process. I will talk about that in another episode. But so this SC gentleman, he was getting coaching over the first 6 months that I knew him from 3 people, all of which are brand names in the training business and coaching business. And among the 3 of us, I mean, I'm sure all 3 of us, we've worked with, I'll bet, 5,000 people collectively over the time we've been coaching, maybe more, just among the 3 of us. Now, number one, with me, he did payments. So I knew, because he needed to space it out. He had another job. He had a family. It wasn't like, oh, he could just do this full time. He's still working his regular job. He's getting coaching from 3 people. He's practicing his narration. He's getting royalty share books and getting books that have a stipend on them. And he's just working his rear end off. And he's doing it at night and he's tired. And, he never complained to me about any of it, but you could tell this guy's working. In fact, I really decided within the first 2 lessons, all right, this is one of those guys that's going to succeed with you or without you because of his attitude about learning. He wanted to know the tools. He wanted to have good advice. He wanted to make sure that he had a foundation for success. And the funny thing that's happened is because he worked like crazy to get his foundation in place, get the best tools, get the best advice he could find, even if it was contradictory. And he didn't go crowdsource everything. He didn't just put up posts in a group and say, hey, I need a new monitor. What's the best monitor to get? He would talk to 2 or 3 people that he trusted and based on their advice, make his decision. And so if there was a conflict, he was only really going through 2 people. But he knew that it was kind of this situation where no matter which person he took the advice from, he was going to win because none of it was bad. It's just that, person A likes this brand and person B likes this brand. But he was always searching for what is kind of a set of the best practices and then going with it. And in the construction trade, he had learned that already. So he's investing in himself way before he was making money in audiobooks. I see that over and over again where I have these people that are going, well, I'll invest after I'm making money. And first thing that tells me is, one, they've never started a small business before. Because when I was really young, like 25, I started a food business. And, if you do almost any other business, you have to go out and buy some infrastructure, to buy mixers and refrigerators and things. And there's just a cost up front to get started in most businesses. Or you go to college for 4 years. And I don't know what, well, I do know. With 5 kids, I do know what college costs these days. So my adult son, who has this great job now, went to college for 4 years. And there's kind of an investment there before he made a dime with his great job that he has now. So he invested up front in his education. All my other kids are doing the same thing. I'm sure you have people that are investing. And so this gentleman was investing, and essentially he stood on the shoulders of a set of people who already had a huge amount of experience. And then he was on the lookout for little tweaks, and he'd call me all the time with, hey, what about this? What about that? Any ideas? Do you have any thoughts on this? He was constantly seeking advice. And even if he knew the answer already or he thought he did, he would go ahead and just ask. And so it turns out that when you combine these 3 things, number one, before he was making tons of money, he was investing. He was investing in training and coaching. He was investing and he was practicing all the time, whenever he could, but he still had a regular job, quote unquote. He had another job, so he couldn't drop that. But he still was just kicking butt, working hard. We'd do sessions late at night. because that was the only time he could do it late in my evening. I mean, I'm starting something at 9:30 at night because that's what worked for him to make it work. But he was willing to do it. He'd stay up late. I'm sure he was going in tired to some of his other jobs, but he was determined that he was going to be better. And by going ahead and getting his coaching in place and essentially training. So could he have done all this on his own without talking to any of us? I'm sure he could have. But here's what he flip it all around. At the end of the day, he has this great situation brewing. Everybody else is going to think he's an overnight success because they start hearing about him. They start hearing about the contracts that he has. They start hearing about the demand where he has to turn things down these days after just a few years because he invested up front. He put in this killer foundation. He built himself a network of advisors, of people that have tremendous experience in a few areas: his business area, his performance area, and his tech area. And he's never been afraid to reach out with a, hey, do you think, is there a way to do this or that? And then he's done. He's worked the extra hours. I'm sure he went into regular work, sometimes just dead tired, but he made a decision. And he's the kind of person that you want to be, that I want to be. He actually, he sent me some stuff today, and I got inspired by it simply because I see how far he has come in such a short period of time. And he reminds me of when I was a young musician, because I happened to have this killer instructor that was giving me great advice. I ended up passing all the other people that were in my zip code in high school. And I had learned that lesson back then. When you have these people, when you have a coach, somebody who can guide you through things, they just shortcut all sorts of little things. And I was fortunate enough to have a guy that would tell me, 'cause he was so much older than me, that it was easy for him to say, hey, that does not make sense. Don't do that. I mean, he'd be brutal and he'd be super nice and he'd go back and forth, but he'd be brutally honest about that's not the best idea. And sometimes he was not so Dale Carnegie about it. He'd just say, hey, that doesn't make any sense. Don't do that. So be like this gentleman. And I want you to keep an eye out. And I'm going to have him on the show here later in this. About a month and a half from now, I'm going to start doing interviews. And this is a gentleman that will be on the show at some point. And watch out for Mr. Steve Campbell. He's out there and he is kicking butt. And if you talk to him, you're going to find out that he has been following a bunch of people who are high end in terms of training, experience, and have made, I mean, oh gosh, I'll just speak for myself. I've made more mistakes than most people have gotten right. I've learned from those mistakes. I continue to make mistakes. And I will continue to do that because your best coaches are people that are doing two things. They are coaching a lot. So they get to see a lot of situations. They see what works and what doesn't, and they have experienced coaching. At the same time, the best coaches are always still students. Now, they're both a student of life. They're usually curious about things, and they are working on their own game behind the scenes to make it better. They're practicing their craft. They are working to be better. They're finding new techniques. And I have this weird thing where sometimes I see somebody doing something, and I think, oh yeah, they watched a video that I produced 4 years ago, and I did it that way. But man, there's three things I've learned since then that are much better, or a refinement on those, and they just don't know about them yet, and that's fine. So they're doing what the best practice I had 3 years ago or 2 years ago or a year ago, and I've moved on with some additional things that I learned how to refine things. All your good coaches are doing something like that. You'll also find many of them are also taking some session or private or working on a hobby, and then they get instructors too. I've had dance instructors and I've had computer instructors. When I started with the computer, I went and hired somebody. I took private lessons, and then I went to classes to learn about computers back in when they, this is the early 90s. So just to date myself. But the point is that your best coaches are going to be both students and coaches. You're going to find out if you learn behind the scenes, most of them are still getting some sort of instruction in something. And what does that do? It gives them a perspective that can help a guy like Steve go from nothing to being booked out for the next 9 months. I don't know too many people that after 3 years are booked out with major publishers over the next 9 months. But he's one of them because he's done all the right things. Stood on the shoulders of people with great experience before him, constantly looking to tweak everything he does, from performance to tech to what's the other one? Business. Yeah, what he's doing business-wise, and making sure that he's following the best practices. And you know what'll happen here at one point? I predict someday he'll be coaching others on this, because people are just going to be wowed by how much this guy has achieved in such a short period of time. It's just about getting better constantly, finding ways to accelerate beyond the others, and more people are getting into this business every day. And you know, good enough will work today, but you're going to have more competitors in the future. So be sure you're refining in everything you do. So Steve Campbell, search him out. Leave him. I mean, everyone's going to be contacting him now. I'll have him on as a guest, and he gets to tell his own story here in a couple months. But I was just so inspired by what he's done, what he's accomplished in an insanely short period of time, compared to so many others that started at the same time as him, are only at about 30% the success level that he is. And really, he just learned from watching these older construction guys who were stick in the muds. They just kept saying, well, you know, when you do it for 40 years, you know how to do it. And it's like, yeah, but there are new tools, there are new techniques, and you don't want to do all of them. He'd find the cool things they were doing that were still valid and helpful. And then he would also use some of the new tools that were available that have come out in the last decade. And he was constantly searching for something better. So he didn't stand still. You can do the same thing. And then in a couple of years, he wasn't thinking short term. That's the one thing that I keep seeing about what he did, though. He was never thinking short term. He would watch these other guys and go, you know what? They're just doing what they've been doing. Find the best practices, find the best people, learn from them. And then practice. All right? That was always something he was doing. So you're gonna have the same road trip. You're gonna do a ton of practice. And then, of course, check out Studio One Jumpstart, RX Jumpstart. I've got a brand new site that's up. If you're listening to this in November of 2019, the new site's going up. Great stuff. I think the educational situation is going to get better and better and better. I'm also looking for refinement. I hope you are too. And go find Steve and congratulate him on his success. And of course, Don Barnes, Audio Barnyard. I look forward to seeing you out in the field, making hay, making money, having great success. See you next time. Bye-bye.